So if you have been following the news headline and all the other stuff, you understand that the US-Iran conflict had greatly affected not just the supply of oil alone, but also the price of oil globally. Now, let me paint you a simple picture. Gas prices in the US has increased from $1 a gallon in early February to now an average America is currently paying for over $4 a gallon at the pump. And just 3 weeks ago, it was within $3 at the pump. So I'm kind of speculative that in the coming months, gas prices should be over $5 a gallon if the Strait of Hormuz does not reopen. Now, despite all of this, everything looks really okay. Like you go at the gas station, you still have gas, your Uber Eats still delivers, your Netflix is still active, like you can still wash your shoes uninterruptedly. This exact condition that you're facing right now, it is what most experts call the lag effect. Now, it is a period whereby everything looks relatively calm, but deep down something is going on. You know, the period in between when the shock happens and when we, the final consumer, feels the impact. Now, before we continue, let's get a bit of geography lesson, because this is going to help us to understand what we'll be discussing next in the video. Now, I want you to picture the Persian Gulf, which include countries like Qatar, UAE, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. You know, all of these whole oil-rich Middle East club. Now, picture all of them sitting around this water body, and there's just only one exit, just one narrow bottleneck connecting all of this whole oil to the rest of the world. That is the Strait of Hormuz. It's roughly about 21 miles wide, and about 20% of the whole world oil flows through this narrow water body. Now, here is where it gets really serious. Iran happens to sit right at the northern edge of this strait. You know, it's as if they are the one that's in charge of this strait, because it happens to be where their country is. I know in late February, when the US and Israeli airstrike happened to kill their supreme leader, they've decided to do something unimaginable. They've actually closed the strait. There has been a series of attacks on ships that try to access this point, and this has also led to about 70% reduction in oil tanker traffic. Like, no company is willing to send its oil vessels on that kind of a danger zone. Over 150 ships are still anchored outside of this strait, waiting for when it will reopen.
So we're now into the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. I would say we're about a couple of kilometers from the shore, and we were told we're only going to get 20 minutes out here because there are drones in the sky. I just did a quick and dirty count of the number of oil tankers and cargo ships out here. These are just ones that are visible to my the naked eye, and I counted 90 of them. And you know, some are pointed northward, others are pointed southward, so there appears to be quite a bit of two-way traffic, you know, close to the Iranian shore.
The International Energy Agency have actually called this as the largest supply disruption in history of the global oil market. Now, a lot of people are looking at this closure and think just reopen the straits and everything will come back to normal, prices of oil will come down, refinery will start working, and we are all good. Bro, if it was as easy as it may seem. Now, most people don't understand how these things work. Supply chain doesn't work like the way you just switch on light and switch it off. There are some major key points that will still affect the global economy even if the straits should reopen today. First thing first, the Hormuz Strait itself. Report has it that Iran has literally laid sea mines on the waterway. And not just that alone, there will also be reported case of 21 merchant ship attack on vessels that tried to cross that way. So even if the ceasefire should hold and the strait reopen, no shipping company is willing to send a $100 million oil tanker to a potentially mined corridor on day one. So the risk involved is very high. And not just that alone, this conflict has also affected the prices for insurance of oil tankers. If you look at the data, it has jumped significantly from 0.12% to 0.4% for just a single trip. Now, if you take this rate to the larger perspective, for example, a very large crude carrier carry 150 to 200 million barrels worth of oil. Added with the insurance fee, it should be summing up to hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single trip. And many shipping companies operate on thin margins, so when insurance costs triple or quadruple, the profit from the cargo is often wiped out. So now, the second reason, and this one has to be with the refineries. So most refineries work on a predictable, non-stop, continuous supply. And if you stop their crude supply for just weeks, you don't just flick it on and start production immediately. there need to be maintenance check, protocol check, revamp checkup, and every other thing that need to be done before using the refineries again. And this has made the energy industry to want that even if the strait reopens today, it's going to take months before the supply normalizes. And finally, it has to be with the issue of storage. Now, with over about 200 loaded tankers sitting trapped in the Strait of Hormuz, regional storage is starting to fill up. You've got producers who can't even export what they're producing. Now, Saudi Arabia and UAE have pipeline alternative that can bypass the strait, but it only handles about 2 million barrels per day, while the strait handles over 20 million barrels per day. So if you do the math, you will see that the Saudi Arabia and the UAE pattern won't be that effective for the whole world. So now that we have seen the impact of this strait being closed and the initial crisis that may follow suit, now let's talk about another vital thing. If this strait remains closed and the demand for oil remains the same, what might be the impact in the whole global economy? Now, the first that will happen is what is called hoarding. In simple terms, when the supply of something that's a necessity is limited, anyone that gets it will keep it within himself and wouldn't want to share. Now, when countries start to panic about supply of oil, they stop managing inventories rationally. They start stockpiling. Just like Japan's refiners, who gets 70% of their oil from the Strait of Hormuz, have already asked their government to release stockpile oil. Countries like Pakistan and the Philippines are scrambling to find alternative supply routes. Now, the Philippines had actually declared a state of national energy emergency. Like, they are the first in the world to do so because of this crisis.
We don't have oil and rely on imports from the Middle East. We need to prepare for the possibility that this will worsen and become prolonged.
Now, everyone is rushing to buy oil at the same time. And what happens? Prices spike. Brent crude that was sitting at around $70 a barrel before the conflict, at the peak, rose to about $120 a barrel. Now, many analysts are openly discussing the potential rate of oil reaching to about $200 a barrel if the closure persists. And you know, when oil prices spike, inflation follows immediately. And we all know what happens with inflation. It's just like a bad ex that refuses to go. Even when uninvited, it always appears. That's what inflation does in an economy. So right now, energy prices in the US is up by nearly 11% in just a single month, and it is the largest monthly increase since 2005. Fertilizer prices has also increased. Jet fuel too has also increased. That is why your next flight is going to cost you more than usual. Shipping charges are also hitting Amazon, FedEx, and UPS. Even aluminium and plastics are getting squeezed because so much of the global chemical supply chain runs through the Gulf. Just imagine, just one strait that is barely 20 miles long and is pulling in this amount of long trade that eats up even to your grocery bills. So we won't go nation by nation and start analyzing how this closure affects each country individually. But from look of things, this particular incident is pointing towards history. It looks like we have been here before, not 100% exactly, but it's pointing towards past events that have happened. One of these same situations that have happened before in history was the 1973 Arab oil embargo. You know, when the OPEC actually cut oil supplies to countries that were supporting the Israel during the Yom Kippur conflict, what actually happened was that oil price actually quadrupled in just months. The US actually went into stagflation. I know that stagflation is kind of a combination of inflation with low growth, that the central bank are literally tied up. They can't do anything to salvage the situation. That was what happened in the 1973 Arab oil embargo. Lines at the gas station actually stretched for blocks. President Richard Nixon actually imposed a price control to manage the situation, but it took years before they finally recovered. Now, another same thing that happened was in 1979 when the Iran Revolution actually affected the global supply of oil. It looks like Iran is one central key point that affects how oil is being distributed nationwide. So what actually happened was that Iranian oil production actually collapsed, and this affected the global supply of oil. Now, in the last 50 years, you understand that whenever there is an oil shock, there used to be an economic slowdown. It looks like if energy gets expensive, every other thing in the world also gets expensive. So right now, what we are witnessing, most analysts are trying to draw comparison with what is happening now to the 1970s oil supply shock. Even the International Energy Agency boss has further acclaimed that the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is the greatest global energy security challenges in history. As some people already believe that it could even be 3 times worse than the 1973 Arab oil embargo. So let us bring all this whole situation back home. What is the current update? Over 230 loaded tankers are still sitting trapped in the Gulf. Iran is still conditioning and restricting passage. The ceasefire itself is kind of fragile and we don't even know what the outcome may look like. So this is where I round up everything. Let us see what the market will play out and the whole ceasefire talk will play out, and I pray everything should go well as planned and life should return back to normal. So if you found this video useful and you have any thoughts or opinion to share, make sure to drop it in the comment section, and I will see you guys in the next video.